Mohammed Atta came from Egypt to study town planning. He enrolled at a technical university in an industrial suburb. From the beginning, the serious young man impressed and intrigued the professor who taught him.
He was not like young students looking, laughing. I was rather interested in his development. He was polite, he was somewhat reserved, he was very intelligent in discussing and argumenting, and the special thing, he was very, very religious.
Shortly after his arrival, Mohammed Atta, already a qualified architect, took a part-time job in this design company. He used his family name, El Amir. The new recruit prayed 5 times a day. His devotion raised little comment in the office at the time.
Other people will go outside 5 minutes for smoking, and Mohammed had 5 minutes time for praying. Why not?
Other students on his course saw Mohammed Atta as a man focused only on his town planning studies. He had no time for pleasure.
He was not interested in cars, and I think he was not really interested in girls like Western young men are.
He was a serious and calm person, but when he got upset about something, he was becoming passionate.
That passion would be recognized and used by Islamic extremists, whose message appealed to another dark side in Atta.
The influence may be from others that pressed out the dark part of his being.
Atta's religion was his driving principle. It became a force, not for good, but for evil within him.
He went to pray, and this gave him force to be what he was, to be two people.
Mohammed Atta was born and raised in Egypt, a country where anger and resentment have long simmered beneath the surface. There is widespread anger against a ruling elite seen as corrupt and undemocratic. Anger, too, against America, which has both supported Egypt's government and proved Israel's strongest ally. This was the environment Mohammed Atta grew up in, the city to which he brought 2 German friends when he returned to Egypt on a study trip in 1995. This was the place where he felt he belonged.
He was very much an Egyptian. The German world, the European world was a strange world for him.
Mohammed Atta and his friends from the university were here on an urban aid project to redevelop Cairo's old quarter. The Germans found that Atta held strong political views. He was critical of corruption in his own government and its close relationship with America, which he felt was against any Muslim cause.
These politics were always in the interest, actually, of the US. And he was very critical of that, actually. I could sense this sort of frustration and rage, especially about what was going on in the world and the biased politics against Muslims, as he would have regarded it.
Atta's rage and frustration were fueled by a government crackdown on Islamic extremists at that time, following a wave of terror attacks. Hundreds were imprisoned. There were accusations of torture, unfair trials. Mohammed Atta was afraid. With his political views, he would be arrested if he returned to live here.
Mohammed gave the impression of being sad and some kind of being depressive about his individual perspective and about the political situation. because he didn't know how to remain in Egypt without being criminalized, because he wanted to live in Egypt.
Mohammed Atta had grown up as the only boy in a traditional Muslim family. His father, a successful lawyer, dominated the child with his forceful personality.
He has no friends. He's a loner. He's like me.
Mohammed Atta's mother doted on her son, who was considered a sensitive boy. He felt himself in the shadow of his two older sisters, both successful graduates. Friends saw him as soft and immature.
Mohammed, I remember him completely in a form of child. He has a child feelings, innocent, virgin.
The future hijacker was a carefree student when he received his first degree from Cairo University. His friends never considered him a natural leader.
Really, he is a very delicate person. Sorry, I'm going to cry about him. He was a very nice person, really.
But Mohammed Atta's father had sympathies with a militant Islamic organization opposed to the government. This was the political background against which his son grew up. The father's views haven't changed to this day.
The pulse of the Arab streets say that America is a filthy thug. America is a filthy thug who wants to hit the Islamic nations.
The frustrations of Atta's father and millions of Muslims found a voice in the remote mountains of Afghanistan. Osama bin Laden was becoming a real force in 1995. His message, America must withdraw its troops from Saudi Arabia. He'd been a key figure behind an earlier attempt to destroy the World Trade Center. Investigators made an intriguing discovery. A member of his terror group, a pilot, had talked of smashing his plane into the CIA headquarters. Mohammed Atta returned to Hamburg in 1996 after his study trip. He found himself in a very different and alien environment. He was lonely and homesick.
I insisted on him leaving. He didn't want to. The last time he was here, he told his mother that he'd had enough and wanted to stay. I miss you, he said. She told him, Daddy wants you to go, and you mustn't upset him. He's spent a great deal of money on your education, and you must finish it.
Atta discovered a refuge in Hamburg, somewhere he could meet like-minded people from a more familiar Islamic world. Somewhere he could express his religious beliefs. Atta found what he was looking for in a nondescript building in a rough part of town. A place where young men from many Arab countries congregate. Only a small sign indicates the existence of the Al-Quds Mosque. Most mosques don't espouse extreme Islamic views, but some have attracted a radical element. When we visited the Al-Quds Mosque, we weren't welcome.
You're not allowed to stay there. You have to go out. Go.
There might be small groups in one or two mosques who are the representatives, the activists of a radical fundamentalist Islam, one with terrorist aims. And these would be the ones to seek out capable persons from among their fellow believers and to get them involved in their activities.
Mohammed Atta grew a beard, a sign of religious devotion, sometimes a sign of radicalization. Investigators believe he met other young men with extreme views at the mosque. It's thought he may have been directly recruited there by an agent of bin Laden. It was now that Atta first gave a sign he was thinking about his own death. He wrote an unusual will, witnessed by some of his friends at the mosque. He urged them not to mourn when he died.
I don't want anyone to weep or cry or rip their clothes or slap their face, because that is an ignorant thing to do.
No women should attend his funeral. It was a sign of his growing obsession with sexual purity, a mark of the Islamic extremist.
And the person who will wash my body near my genitals must wear gloves, so he won't touch my genitals.
He probably wanted to make it known, by writing this document, that he was going to commit an act in which he himself, in all likelihood, would die. It could have been a sort of psychological preparation carried out by a person committing suicide against the background of a mujahid, a warrior following the way of God.
The Al-Quds Mosque was the place where Atta spent time with two other young Arab men. They were all members of a terror group in Hamburg. They would all become pilots and crash their planes on September the 11th.
There is no justification for terrorism. How are terrorist groups founded? One person convinces another and another of a valid reason to kill himself, taking away the most precious possession a human being has through a strong belief. He stops thinking about himself.
The man who flew the second hijacked plane into the South Tower of the World Trade Center came from the United Arab Emirates. Marwan al-Shehi's family don't want to talk about the 23-year-old who left here to study in Germany. He brought shame on his conservative and religious country. The Al-Shehi home is in mourning, closed to all visitors.
There's nobody here?
Close the...
I just saw somebody come in.
No, that's not...
Police told us to leave. But we did find clues here to Marwan al-Shehi's personal journey. The son of a local imam, the boy was close to his father and deeply religious. He went to study in Hamburg on a government scholarship. But when his father died 2 years ago, al-Shehi became increasingly estranged from his family.
He was doing his studies in Germany. He was a normal individual till he went to Germany. It seems when he went to Germany, he met these radical fanatics who have a very different understanding of Islam than we do.
This is the voice of Ziad Jarrah, who seized the controls of the fourth plane.
Captain, I would like to order to remain seated. We have bomb aboard.
The young man who flew Flight 93 to destruction came to Hamburg from the Lebanon in 1997. He rented a room from a German landlady in a genteel suburb of the city. Unlike Atta, Ziad Jarrah was outgoing. Everyone was struck by his good looks, his sense of fun.
Did you like him?
Yeah. Yes. He was a nice young man, really, and we got on well. He used to bring me back presents too when he went home. Sometimes we would chat when I was having tea, and I would invite him to have a tea with me.
Ziad Jarrah met a girl, a Turkish-German medical student. They lived together, to the surprise of his family back in Beirut.
We loved the girl, she's very nice, she loves Ziad. He was living with his girlfriend, and this is against radical Muslims' thinking and behavior and acceptance.
It was a serious relationship, yes. And they were well suited too. And they loved each other. I'm convinced of that.
Jarrah enrolled on a degree course to study aircraft engineering. He wanted to return to Beirut and open his own company. He also had an ambition to learn to fly. Jarrah was clever and popular and enjoyed a beer with his German friends. But within a few months of arriving in Hamburg, Jarrah began to change. He'd made new friends elsewhere in the city. A portrait painted by his landlady showed small but significant changes in his appearance.
At first I didn't notice anything. But later on he kept a small prayer mat in his room, and he grew a beard. And I poked fun at him because of it.
Jarrah had started spending time at the Al-Quds Mosque with Al-Shehi and Atta. All of them now had beards. In the summer of 1997, Atta disappeared from his university for over a year. He didn't want to give any explanation. There were difficulties, he said, back home.
He told me that he was absent because there had been problems in his family.
We've now established that Atta travelled to Afghanistan, to the camps of Al-Qaeda. He was followed by Al-Shehi and Jarrah. In bin Laden's camps, recruits were trained in terror tactics, using weapons, explosives and poisons. They learned forgery and how to carry out covert activities. Here it's believed Mohammed Atta revealed leadership potential and was singled out for special training. While Atta was in his camps, Osama bin Laden made his clearest ever threat to the United States. He considered all Americans legitimate targets of terror.
فلا تمييز بيننا بين الرجل لابس عسكري أو مدني بل هم جميعا نعتبرهم أهداف.
In August that year, bin Laden's men bombed the US embassy in Nairobi, killing 200 civilians, most of them African. 12 Americans died.
The US bombed bin Laden's camps but failed to kill him. Now, we understand, bin Laden conceived his most devastating plan, a terror attack within his enemy's territory.
This is part of a long-term plan. This isn't an impulsive activity. When you train people in Afghanistan in well-organized camps, this is a comprehensive framework, and it's a long-term project of destabilizing freedom, and it's an assault on basically civilization.
Mohammed Atta reappeared at his Hamburg University in the autumn of 1998. The teaching staff found he was a changed man.
He looked more serious. He didn't smile as much as before. He worked hard.
I didn't see him smile or anything. He was, all the time that we talked together, he was very tight, very tense, I think, and he would never say anything private.
Atta's studies took on a new urgency. People here have told us his life outside was a mystery. But we've established that he had become an operational commander for bin Laden. He was preparing a spectacular terror attack, as yet 3 years away. Following the blueprint laid down in Al-Qaeda's manuals, he formed a terror cell, secret, self-contained. He found an apartment, number 54 Marienstrasse. It became the meeting place for at least 6 Arab students, members of the cell. Mohammed Atta himself, together with Al-Shehi and Jarrah, would become 3 of the pilots. Our researchers show another flatmate, a Yemeni, Ramzi bin al-Shib, was to have been the 4th pilot on September the 11th. Their German landlord found nothing suspicious about the 3 young Arab students who signed the lease on the flat. They were bearded but smartly dressed. They seemed respectable. They only made one request, for high-speed phone lines for their 2 computers.
So this is the lease that you signed?
Yes, the original Hamburger Mietvertrag, the paper.
2 of the 3 men who signed the lease are believed by investigators to have been responsible for the cell's logistical support.
Said Bahachi, Mohammed El Amir,
That's
Ramzi bin Naishib. Yes, Mohammed El Amir, Atta.
Mohammed Atta, using his family name, was the other person to sign the lease.
And did they have all the right paperwork, all the right credentials?
All the papers are correct.
The tragedy that we know is that it was a convenient enough or accommodating enough setting that they could be successful. And as a result of that success, America and freedom-loving people around the world were damaged severely.
That winter, there was a missed opportunity to penetrate the cell. In the aftermath of the Nairobi bombing, German intelligence was carrying out surveillance on one of the men who signed the lease on the flat with Atta. He was suspected of links to bin Laden. The activities at the Marienstrasse flat could have yielded valuable clues as to the group's intentions. But the Germans never focused on Mohammed Atta or the others who had become the pilots. That winter, Atta went to the university authorities with a special request. In the liberal atmosphere of a German academic institution, the request raised no suspicions.
I said, of course, that's usual and it's necessary that you, as a group of foreign students, have a special room for praying. And I said, I will help you.
But unknown to the authorities, the room wasn't only used for praying. Atta installed a phone line and a computer, which investigators are now examining. Mohammed Atta's thesis on urban renewal in an ancient Islamic city was completed at the end of 1999. It was given the highest mark. But when the results were announced, the student's behavior towards a woman examiner caused considerable embarrassment.
I shook hands and congratulated him, and of course my colleague assisting the oral examination wanted to shake hands too and to congratulate.
And she was standing there. He wouldn't take her hand.
For me, it was a somewhat astounding reaction.
It was very embarrassing.
Maybe now I should mark that this could be sign of a deeper changing.
On the front of Mohammed Atta's thesis, there was an unusual dedication.
What does it say?
It says, "Speak my prayers and my sacrifice and my life and my death belong to Allah, the Lord of the worlds." Quran 6:162.
My life and my death belong to Allah.
Yes, my life and my death.
Mohammed Atta's life in Germany was drawing to a close. A new phase of the plan was due to begin in another country. But there was an obstacle: stamps in his passport, evidence of trips to Afghanistan. Atta had been back to bin Laden's camps again that year.
Guten Tag, ich bin der elektronische Fotograf.
Atta needed a new passport. So did Al-Shehi and Jarrah. They too had been in bin Laden's camps that year. All 3 men reported their passports stolen.
Why did they claim that?
So they can get a visa to the US without them knowing that they've been to Afghanistan and Pakistan.
So to start with a clean sheet, as it were.
Right.
"15 months before the September attacks, 3 of the men who would pilot the planes arrived, separately, in America. Arab tourists who'd come from Hamburg attracted no attention. The States was to prove too open, too unsuspecting.
There were serious breakdowns. We'd not been attacked in our homeland since Pearl Harbor. We did not feel that America itself was a target of terrorist activities. We were lax in that regard.
The trio made their way south to Florida and the small town of Venice. With its long hours of sunshine, Florida is the place where people come to learn to fly as quickly as possible. The men from Hamburg headed for 2 small flying schools. Ziad Jarrah checked into the Florida Flight Training Center. On the same small airstrip, just 100 yards up the road, Mohammed Atta and Marwan al-Shehi enrolled at Huffman Aviation. Al-Shehi was quiet, didn't say much, but right from the start, Atta rubbed people up the wrong way.
I thought he was very arrogant, and this is the right wording I would use again. And I have heard now a lot of people thought he was a very arrogant son of a bitch.
The striking feature were his eyes. They were immovable. They were extremely cold.
The 2 men let it be known that Atta was a member of Saudi royalty, al-Shehi, his bodyguard. They always flew together, Atta usually at the controls, al-Shehi respectfully behind him. A British woman was learning to fly at Huffman at the same time. After the September attacks, she rang the FBI, before Atta's name had been made public. She'd always been suspicious that something about him just wasn't right.
That is something that struck me just odd, of somebody who seemed to be so in command, and yet approaching this aircraft as though it was a means to an end, rather than a pleasure or enjoyment. And this is why one couldn't help but get suspicious as to why. Why is he here? Why is he doing this?
Only once did Anne Greaves see any sign of enthusiasm from the 2 mysterious Arabs. It was in the computer room, where they'd been busy on the internet.
Mohammed Atta and al-Shehi were hugging each other with joy and almost dancing in the room. It must have been sometime towards the end of October.
On October the 17th, the USS Cole, an American warship, was attacked by an Al-Qaeda suicide squad. 17 US sailors died. In Afghanistan, bin Laden celebrated this direct blow to America's might. So too did some of his followers in Florida.
And I thought this was extraordinary, because I thought, wow, there's some life in them then after all, because this I had not seen before.
But no one in authority at Huffman questioned more deeply why 2 Arab tourists with little enthusiasm for aviation were learning to fly. 13 months before the attacks, 2 of the trainee pilots, Mohammed Atta and Ziad Jarrah, tried to get a US visa for another member of the Hamburg terror cell. He was living in the Marienstrasse flat, his name Ramzi bin al-Shib. We've discovered he was to have flown the 4th plane on September the 11th, but his visa was repeatedly refused by the US authorities. He was suspected of links to the Cole terror attack. Yet no one thought to question those who tried 4 times to bring such a man to America. And no one questioned where the money was coming from to pay for the flying lessons.
November on here, yeah.
All the way. Yeah. It shows when he started, he flew 1.3 hours in 769.
Atta and al-Shehi paid nearly $19,000 each for their flying course alone.
This is the total amount that he paid in order to fly.
The 2 students had no visible means of support. Yet they had credit cards and plenty of money in bank accounts they'd opened in Florida. Funds would arrive regularly. They were coming from Dubai in the Emirates, one of the world's busiest and most anonymous banking centres. Much of the cash was coming through the account of Al-Shehi, a citizen of the Emirates. He was to be the pilot of the second plane in the September attacks.
There were 4 transfers totaling about $100,000. And with UAE students, it is normal to have a large transfer to buy a car or something.
But that's still a lot of money, isn't it? $100,000 for a student.
A total of $100,000. Of course, they didn't come at one time.
Each transfer was kept deliberately small to avoid triggering alarms in the international banking system. The way the funds were channeled to America through Al-Shehi's bank account and to Mohammed Atta via local money changers is just one example of the skillful tradecraft used by the terror organization. Investigators are looking for a Saudi-born banker, Mustafa Ahmed al-Hassawi, suspected of being bin Laden's paymaster. He was traveling extensively in the region at that time.
What about the money trail? Shouldn't questions have been raised about some of the transfers?
The answer is yes, but let's put this in perspective. The September 11th event is estimated to have cost about $500,000. In a banking system where every day there are trillions of dollars turned over, it is not surprising that that amount of money, particularly over a period of time, could have been lost in the system.
But what was surprising, yet still aroused no suspicion, was a trip Atta and Al-Shehi made to a jet aircraft simulator. They told the company they wanted to join an airline and needed experience in a large plane.
They wanted an exposure to a jet aircraft. They came from flying a small airplane that flew maybe at 100 miles per hour. The aircraft that we were simulating was flying at 300 miles per hour. So it was a faster airplane, requires a little bit faster train of thought. I spent a total of 8 hours with these 2 individuals, 6 in the simulator and another 2 hours more or less in briefing and debrief. My feeling is, looking back, of course, is that it was just, they were doing a job, they were preparing to perform a job, they needed to prepare for that task, and they were simply doing it.
10 months before the September attacks, Atta and Al-Shehi got their private pilot's licenses. Their families didn't know they had gone to America or had learned how to fly. Back in the Emirates, Marwan Al-Shehi's relations were growing concerned. He'd returned home from Germany only once at his family's insistence to marry a local girl. But he never even lived with her and soon disappeared again. The Al-Shehi family asked the government to try and find their son.
We always felt that he had problems because by contacting his friends in Germany, we did know that he had some close relations with people, in a way, linked with radical Islamic groups. Then we didn't know who it was. Was it bin Laden or anybody else linked with bin Laden?
9 months before the attacks, there was a key moment at Dubai airport. The pilot, Ziad Jarrah, arrived from bin Laden's camps via Pakistan. We've discovered that by now the Americans had their suspicions about Jarrah. They asked the Dubai authorities to question him about his links to Al-Qaeda. Jarrah said he was a pilot. He had a US visa and admitted he'd be going back to the States. The US was informed, but told the Emirates to let Jarrah continue his journey. The American government has declined to comment on this missed opportunity. Jarrah then went to Beirut for a family wedding. His parents knew he'd been to America and learnt to fly, but had no idea he was a follower of bin Laden. He successfully hid his true face, that of a terrorist.
He was behaving in a very modern way, dancing, socializing with everybody in the party. He has a lot of friends, and everything was normal and okay. He doesn't have any sign or signal that you might think about it, that he changed his way of behavior or his thinking even.
In the 8 months before the attacks, the operational commander of the terror group made at least 7 trips over and back across the Atlantic. No one knows exactly what Atta was doing in his travels round Europe, in Prague, Madrid, and back in Hamburg. But it is known that bin Laden passes important messages to cell commanders through couriers sent from Afghanistan. 5 months before the attacks, a taxi driver in southern Germany picked up an unusual fare. 3 Arab passengers wanted to go 400 miles in his taxi. He was ordered to take them to Hamburg. The men in the back of the taxi didn't want to speak, but the driver told me that the Arab sitting next to him had started chatting. They passed a road accident where people lay injured, and the man joked that he'd seen plenty of dead bodies in Afghanistan.
So I asked him if he'd been a soldier in Afghanistan. He said, yes, he had been.
He was a soldier in Afghanistan.
He said he was a soldier in Afghanistan.
The taxi driver was told to go to Hamburg railway station, where a friend would be waiting to pay the fare.
When the other man approached the taxi, the man sitting next to me jumped out, and they hugged.
It was Mohammed Atta who hugged the man from Afghanistan. The taxi driver recognized him after the September attacks.
I saw Atta's picture on television, and I knew that it had been him who had paid for the taxi here in Hamburg, that he had been the man.
Are you sure it was Mohammed Atta?
Yeah.
The trips made by Mohammed Atta must have been important, because he was taking big chances. Coming back into Miami on one occasion, he knew his visa had expired, but would the INS, the Immigration Service, check him out? The outdated visa was noticed, and he was singled out for tough questioning.
How much time have you spent in the United States?
But Atta knew how to work the system. He argued successfully for an extension to his visa. It would allow him to stay until September.
The fact that Atta was able to get a visa in the first place and then to abuse it by leaving the country and coming back even though it had expired is an indication of the atrocious way in which our INS operates.
4 months before the September attacks, Atta's hire car was clocking up the miles. The 3 pilots had moved to the east coast of Florida and rented a series of anonymous apartments close to each other. And then a dozen more Arabs began arriving in 1s and 2s. They came from Saudi Arabia via Dubai and the Gulf. These men were hand-picked followers of bin Laden, trained in his camps. They were to be the foot soldiers in the attacks, the muscle that would actually terrorize the passengers. None of the new arrivals attracted the attention of officialdom. They had the necessary visas, and they'd been chosen because they had no record of terrorist connections. They blended unobtrusively into the ethnic mix of South Florida. The hijackers passed their time in local gyms, getting fit for their coming mission. When one of the pilots, Ziad Jarrah, applied for a membership, He said he would only need it until September. He told the gym's owner, Bert Rodriguez, he wanted lessons in martial arts.
But one of the great ways, come straight ahead with a straight knife. Yes.
It raised no suspicion that a businessman, as Jarrah described himself, wanted to learn self-defense and attack using knives.
This one is...
Once again, Jarrah proved the perfect deceiver.
He gave me an appearance of, of being a serious, well-educated, which he was, committed, which he was, dedicated, which he was person.
Jarrah told Bert Rodriguez he was teaching his newfound skills to his friends. He would return with questions they'd asked about martial arts techniques.
He tried to, again, put on an appearance of timidness, but at the same time, I could also see that he had discipline. When I got him up there, he was showing his true self. He was showing his competitive side.
Atta was the link man between all the hijackers living in different locations in Florida. That summer, he moved unnoticed amongst American holidaymakers. His tradecraft was meticulous, and he was thrifty. He distributed small amounts of cash using money orders hard to trace.
23, 24, and 25.
He picked a little-known car rental company.
I think Mohammed Atta came here for price. I mean, he rented the cheapest car he could from us. He didn't rent the best car we have. He rented the cheapest car we had. A lot of criminals do come here simply because, we're a little guy out of the way and a lot less conspicuous than going to a big place.
The terrorists opened postbox accounts to receive mail anonymously. They deliberately conducted communications in busy public places, using a chain store for email. No one traced their presence on the web. They may have encrypted their messages. The operation was low-tech, virtually undetectable for a nation geared up for a very different intelligence war.
We're very good at listening on satellites or taking pictures from the sky of the former Soviet Union. Where we have fallen down is the agility to deal with these much smaller, more flexible, and more violent terrorist groups that are now our enemy.
Just weeks before the September attacks, there were threats from bin Laden. He promised a body blow against America.
We always had a big problem with the West, convincing them how dangerous these people could be.
But you warned them.
We did, and they did have a feeling that something was coming, but they didn't know where or when or how.
Despite his careful planning, Atta came near to discovery in his final weeks in Florida. He had no local driving license, and one night the police pulled him over. It was an offense, and Atta was booked and given a court date. He failed to turn up, but no one came looking for him. Atta learnt his lesson.
I need you to sign this citation.
Within a fortnight, 6 of the hijackers had obtained local driving licenses. Atta moved on to meet the last 4 hijackers to join the group. They'd merged seamlessly into the Arab neighborhood of Patterson in New Jersey to await their orders for September the 11th. But one of the men, a Saudi, should have been noticed. That January, the CIA had learned of Khalid al-Midar's involvement in the terror plot to bomb the USS Cole. He had links to bin Laden, But his name wasn't put on an immigration watch list until the end of August, 7 months later. Agents would still be searching for him when the planes hit their targets.
There seems to have been a breakdown of any kind of control that might have prevented this particular individual from coming here.
Yeah, you're right. They should have been picked up when they entered the United States, failed to do so. It also was a breakdown in the handoff of information from the intelligence services to the domestic law enforcement agencies. Several of these people had been tracked by intelligence until they got inside the United States, and then they were lost in our own country.
Perhaps the greatest missed opportunity to foil the plot came just a month before the attacks, when a French-Moroccan student was jailed in Minnesota. Zacharias Moussaoui was taking flight lessons financed by the Hamburg cell. He'd aroused the suspicion of an instructor. But Moussaoui wouldn't answer any questions, and investigators didn't realize how significant he might be until after September the 11th. Moussaoui now faces 6 counts of conspiracy to commit acts of terror. The months before the attack, 19 hijackers were in place. One of them was still undergoing intensive last-minute training in order to pilot the 4th plane. The targets in New York and Washington had been fixed. The terrorists even made test runs on some of the flights they would take. Atta tried to check in-flight security. He asked to look round the cockpit. The request was refused. But the hijackers discovered that Tuesday was the quietest flying day. More chance the flights would keep to schedule, fewer passengers to fight back. The terrorists then booked seats in business class, which would give them the best chance of seizing the controls. Two days before the attacks, at Boston Airport, Atta was watching planes prepare for departure. Again, it was a woman, a passenger, who noticed his suspicious behavior.
He walked very aggressively with his head held very high, looking around. When I was actually boarding the airplane, he was standing at the gate counter, writing in a card. Really, the only thing he could see of the airplane was the pilots and the front of the airplane. And I thought to myself, this is very strange. And I was actually afraid. I actually watched everyone get on the plane because I'd made a promise to myself that if he got on the plane, I would go see the captain, because his behavior had been so bizarre.
The terror operation was in its final 24 hours. In a city in the Emirates, bin Laden's mysterious money man appeared again. This time to collect cash, sent back from America via a money exchange. $5,000 from Mohammed Atta and 2 other hijackers. They were obeying Al-Qaeda's rules, returning money to finance future missions. The transfers were received by Mustafa Ahmed al-Hawasi.
Mustafa Ahmed picked up $5,000. The next day, he disappears to Pakistan. That was the day of the attacks. I wouldn't say more than that. That explains a very strong link.
Mustafa Ahmed is wanted across the globe. So too are the 3 remaining students from the Marienstrasse flat. They fled just days before the attacks. It's believed they're in Afghanistan. They're suspected of providing support for the terror group in the States. One of them is the man who should have been the 4th pilot, Ramzi bin al-Shibh. He holds the key to the many unanswered questions about the Hamburg terror cell. The night before the hijack, Atta and another hijacker headed out of Boston. It seems the plan was for the 19 men to split up to avoid attracting attention before catching their flights. The 2 men checked into the Comfort Inn in Portland, Maine. Their final hours would be spent wandering the city. A document entitled "The Last Night" would later be found in Atta's luggage, also in a car used by the hijackers and in the wreckage of a plane. It made it clear that death lay ahead.
Make an oath to die. Remind yourself that in this night you will face many challenges. Obey God, stand fast.
That evening, images of the two hijackers were captured by various security cameras. No one knows if all 19 men read Atta's last instructions, or whether it was just the pilots who knew they would die. Atta appeared stern-faced in the background, but his young companion seemed oblivious, even carefree.
I can't believe that 19 people were aware that they are going to die, and none of them just disappeared a couple of days before the attacks, or even at least said something about it.
In his instructions for the last night, Atta urged the men to make a final checklist of their passports, wills, and knives. It was a chilling reference to their victims.
You must make your knife sharp and must not discomfort your animal during the slaughter.
On the morning of September the 11th, Atta and his companion caught a short flight to Boston Airport. These last pictures of the men show no sign of what lay ahead.
When the hour of reality, the 0 hour, approaches, open your heart and welcome death for the sake of God.
Betrayed by what he did here at the university and to you?
Yes, we feel, of course. What do you feel? You teached him, you are interested, you supported him. What do you feel when you hear that this is a killer?
At Boston Airport that morning, another group of hijackers assembled. Marwan al-Shehi flew the second jet into the South Tower of the World Trade Center.
Remember to pray before reaching the target. After that, God willing, we will meet in paradise.
It doesn't matter what Bin Laden says about it or what anybody says about it. But these people were wrong, terribly wrong.
A third hijacked plane was smashed into the Pentagon shortly afterwards.
I can't find anything that have affected our religion more than killing those people, thousands of people.
In the skies above New York's burning landmarks, another tragedy was being played out on board Flight 93. News of the earlier attacks was filtering through on mobile phones when the hijackers stormed the cockpit, the captain shouting, "Get out of here." Then air traffic control heard a voice on the intercom. It is presumed to be Ziad Jarrah's.
Hi, the captain. I would like to remain seated. We have bomb aboard and we are going to back to the airport and we have our demand, so please remain quiet.
Air traffic control asked other planes in the area if they had heard Jarrah's threat.
Executive 956, did you understand that transmission? Affirmative. He said there was a bomb on board. United 93, understand you have a bomb on board. Go ahead.
They called Flight 93 22 times, in vain.
United 93, United 903, do you hear Cleveland? United 93, United 93, Cleveland. United 93, do you still hear Cleveland?
At 10:03, Flight 93 crashed into the fields near Pittsburgh. Not since the height of the Cold War had most of us felt so vulnerable.
Responsible for that aspect of the design, so maybe I'm wrong, but I believe it was not considered, and further I believe that had it been considered, it would have been proven to be impossible.